The cold had a voice. It crept into the trenches at night, whispering through the cracks in the earth, biting at fingers and lips until even prayers froze in the air. Private Edward Collins had stopped trying to fight it weeks ago. He just curled deeper into his coat, hands buried beneath his armpits, and stared at the sky that never seemed to lighten. It was December 24, 1914. A grey morning hung over the Belgian front, and the only colour left in the world was the dull rust of frozen mud. The war had ground itself into stalemate, both armies dug in, waiting for orders that never came. Each day was the same, shelling, waiting, praying, losing another friend to the mud or to madness. Edward rubbed the frost from the edge of his rifle and breathed into his cupped hands. The steam rose briefly, then vanished. "Bloody Christmas," muttered Corporal Jenkins, stomping beside him. "Never thought I'd see one in a hole like this." Edward gave a faint smile. "Could be worse." Jenkins snorted. "How?" "We're knee-deep in filth, eating cold beans, and Jerry's about 50 yards that way with a machine gun aimed at my head. Still breathing, aren't we?" Jenkins laughed under his breath. "Barely." Their banter was the only warmth in that place. The smell of damp earth, sweat, and decay had become part of life. Somewhere down the trench, someone was trying to hum "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen," though his voice cracked halfway through. It made Edward's chest ache, not from the cold, but from memory. Home. A crackling fireplace in Kent. His mother's roast potatoes. His sister's laugh as she placed a paper crown on his head. He swallowed hard. The image hurt too much to hold. By afternoon, the sky began to dim again. Twilight came early in winter. The gunfire that had been steady all morning faded, and an eerie silence stretched across the battlefield. Men lifted their heads cautiously. The front was rarely this quiet. Edward's breath came out slow, fogging the air. He leaned over the parapet, peering into the distance. The stretch of no man's land lay still, a wasteland of wire and corpses, frozen puddles and shattered helmets. Then, from the German line, came a sound. Faint. Fragile. Like a candle flickering in the dark. A song. Edward frowned. It was too soft to make out the words, but the melody was unmistakable. Still Nacht. Heilige Nacht. The Germans were singing. For a moment, no one in the British trench moved. Then, somewhere to Edward's left, a voice joined in, hesitant, uncertain, but human. Silent Night, Holy Night. More voices followed, until both sides were singing the same tune in two different tongues, their voices weaving through the frozen air. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Jenkins stared in disbelief. "You hearing this, Collins?" Edward nodded slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I think I am." Erupted beneath them. Bullets hissed like angry bees, shells screamed overhead, and the snow, once so pure, turned crimson in moments. Men fell around him, their cries muffled by the chaos. Edward kept moving, not out of courage, but because stopping meant dying. His body acted on instinct, but his mind was elsewhere, back on that silent night, when laughter and song had filled the same air now thick with death. He reached a crater and dropped behind it, chest heaving. His hands shook as he reloaded. Something inside him, something fragile and human, was breaking. Then he saw it. A shape through the smoke. German uniform. Rifle raised. Edward froze, breath caught. The soldier's face came into focus, young, terrified, eyes wide with the same exhaustion that mirrored his own. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. Neither moved. Neither wanted to. But the war moved for them. A shot rang out, not his. The German jerked backward and fell, motionless. Edward didn't look away. His hands trembled. His throat burned. He felt the weight of Franz's photograph in his pocket, pressing against his heart like a reminder. He dropped his rifle. He stood there, amidst the chaos, unarmed, the snow falling thicker now, muting the sounds of battle. Around him, men shouted, died, charged, and yet he felt none of it. he felt only the quiet ache of loss, of understanding. He whispered a prayer, not for victory, not for glory, but for peace. And when the shrapnel came, slicing through the air like the final punctuation of a cruel story, Edward didn't duck. The world flashed white. When the guns finally fell silent, when the smoke cleared and the frozen earth grew still again, a medic found him lying in the snow. His hand was clutching something, a photograph of a woman and a child, edges worn and stained. And beside it, half buried in the frost, was a small wooden cross. The medic paused, kneeling quietly. He didn't know the story, but something in the scene made him bow his head. Far off, beyond the trenches, the church bells of a distant village began to ring. Their sound drifted across the battlefield like a promise, fragile, defiant, eternal. Snow continued to fall, soft and endless, covering the scars of the earth one flake at a time. And for the first time since the world had gone mad, the front was quiet once more. "Tommy! You, come out!" The British soldiers exchanged nervous glances. "Is that a bloody trap?" Jenkins muttered. "Maybe," Edward said quietly. "Maybe not." Another voice answered, a British sergeant yelling, "Stay where you are." But by then, curiosity had already taken root. Edward saw movement across the wire. A German soldier, unarmed, climbing out of his trench with both hands raised. The man's helmet glinted faintly in the pale light as he stumbled into no man's land. He was singing again. Jenkins cursed under his breath. "That mad fool's gonna get shot." But no one fired. Edward's pulse thudded in his throat. Something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt since before the war. Without thinking, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and climbed out of the trench. "Collins! What the hell are you doing?" Jenkins shouted. Edward turned back with a faint grin. "Celebrating Christmas." Edward's boots sank into the frozen mud, crunching through the frost as he made his way across no man's land. The world felt impossibly still, no guns, no shouts, no screams. Just the whisper of wind and the faint hum of distant singing that trembled in the air like breath on glass. Halfway across, he stopped. The German soldier was close now, no more than 20 paces away. His uniform was a patchwork of mud and frost, a grey coat buttoned tight against the cold. He was younger than Edward expected, no more than 20, with pale hair that stuck out from beneath his cap and eyes the color of river stones. The man smiled, a small, cautious thing. He held up his hands. "No shoot, J.A.?" Edward managed a grin. "No shoot." They stood there a moment, two men caught between worlds, before stepping closer. When their hands met, it was clumsy and hesitant, but real. The handshake was firm, rough with calluses and cold. "Franz," the German said, tapping his chest. "Edward." Franz nodded, smiling wider now. "Christmas, Edward." "Christmas," he echoed softly. Behind them, voices rose on both sides. More men were emerging from the trenches, British, German, Scots, Saxons, all crossing the wire, waving, calling greetings in broken phrases. Cigarettes were passed like treasure, chocolate bars traded for bread, buttons exchanged as souvenirs. Laughter filled the frozen air. Jenkins climbed out reluctantly, muttering, "This is madness," but Edward saw the faint smile tugging at his lips as he joined the others. Before long, someone produced a football, a battered leather one that had somehow survived the mud. A shout went up, and within minutes, the flat ground between the trenches became a makeshift pitch. Coats marked the goals, and soldiers from both armies shouted in delight as they slipped, tackled, and kicked amid the snow. Franz was faster than he looked. He darted across the field, laughing as he sidestepped a Scotsman and sent the ball sailing toward the makeshift goal. Edward dove, missing by inches. The ball thudded into the mud behind him. Cheers erupted. "Ha! England 0, Germany 1. Franz shouted, grinning ear to ear. Edward sat up, laughing. "You lot cheat. Name. Good football." For a few blissful hours, the war melted away. The sounds of laughter replaced the drum of artillery, boots scuffed the dirt where bodies once fell. Somewhere in the distance, a harmonica joined a fiddle, the two weaving a melody that could have been at home in any village across Europe. As dusk approached, the game ended, and the men gathered near a small campfire built in the middle of no man's land. Someone brewed tea from melted snow, others poured schnapps from dented flasks. The flames cast flickering light across tired faces that looked, for once, almost young again. Franz reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden carving, a cross, roughly cut but beautiful in its simplicity. He turned it over in his hands before offering it to Edward. "For you," he said. Edward hesitated. "I can't take that." Franz shook his head. "You can. Christmas gift." Edward took it gently, the wood warm from Franz's hands. "Thank you." "Next year," Franz said softly, staring into the fire. "Maybe no war." Edward's throat tightened. "Yeah," he murmured. "Maybe no war." The flames flickered higher, and for a moment, the two men sat in silence, listening to the soft murmur of voices around them, Germans singing O Tannenbaum, the British answering with God Save the King. The melodies intertwined like ribbons, carried upward into the cold night. When the moon rose, pale and distant, it bathed the battlefield in silver light. Edward looked across the sea of faces, men who, tomorrow, would again become enemies, and wondered how such peace could exist here, even for one night. He thought of home, of his mother lighting candles in the window, of carols drifting through narrow London streets. He thought of Franz's wife, perhaps doing the same somewhere far away in Bavaria. "Crazy world," Franz said suddenly, breaking the silence. Edward nodded slowly. "Why? But maybe it ain't all bad." Franz smiled, but there was something sad in it, the kind of smile a man wears when he knows a dream is slipping away. They shook hands one more time before parting ways, each returning to his trench under the falling snow. Edward turned back once and saw Franz silhouetted by the firelight, his breath rising in soft clouds. He wanted to call out, to say something that would make the moment last, but the words froze in his throat. The night swallowed them both. When dawn came, so did the orders.
The voice of the sergeant tore through the morning fog like a bayonet through cloth. "All men back to positions. No fraternization, you hear me? I'll have any man shot who steps out there again." The words cracked like thunder across the trench line, breaking whatever spell the night had cast. Edward sat against the earthen wall, still clutching the wooden cross Franz had given him. His fingers traced its rough edges. He could still smell the faint scent of pine on it, a scent so out of place among mud, rot, and cordite. He wanted to believe that something had changed, that the world would hold on to the peace they'd built out there in the snow. But as the distant rumble of artillery began again, that fragile hope trembled. The sound rolled through the frozen air, followed by the mechanical cough of machine guns warming to life. By noon, the truce was over. The Germans were silent at first, almost reluctant. But war has its own gravity, and soon the familiar rhythm returned, a rifle crack, a shout, a scream swallowed by distance. Edward ducked instinctively as a bullet whistled overhead. The mud beside him exploded, splattering his face with cold earth. The world had reset itself. The dream was gone. "Bloody hell," Jenkins growled, reloading beside him. "Didn't take long, did it?" Edward didn't answer. He was staring at no man's land, at the same spot where he and Franz had shared laughter the night before. The ground was scarred again, torn open by shells, the fire pit they'd built buried beneath churned soil and smoke. He felt something twist deep inside. It wasn't just fear this time. It was grief. Late that afternoon, orders came down for a push. Reconnaissance patrol. The British line was to send 6 men across to test the wire, mark the enemy's new positions. Edward volunteered. He didn't know why, maybe out of guilt, maybe because part of him couldn't bear to sit still while the memory of peace still burned in his chest. As the light faded, he crawled through the mud, heart pounding, breath visible in sharp bursts. The landscape he had walked through so freely just a night ago was now death's playground once more, every step deliberate, every sound too loud. The snow had turned pink in places. Edward reached the edge of a crater and paused, listening. The world was quiet except for the distant thud of artillery. He pulled his scarf higher, inching forward. Then he saw him. A figure lying half-buried near the wire, a German uniform, arm outstretched, palm open toward the sky. Edward's breath caught. The light was dim, but the face was clear enough. Franz. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared, the noise of the battlefield fading until only the wind remained. He crawled closer, each inch heavier than the last.